Welcome back to my channel, Brutus on Baseball. Today's video is another continuation in the series that I'm making all about the biggest prospect busts in the history of my collecting days, at least from the time that I was prospecting, from about 1988 to 2005 or 6. That's when I stopped and I decided I'm not going to do this anymore. I went all the way from Greg Jeffries up through Rick Ankiel and Rocco Baldelli in the last video that I just made. And today I'm picking up where I left off in 2001. And I'm going to start this video with a two-sport star from Stanford University and Chicago White Sox outfielder Joe Borchard. Borchard was a really highly rated quarterback coming out of Stanford University. The White Sox took a flyer on him with the 12th pick in the 2000 draft and gave him a $5.3 million signing bonus to keep him from pursuing football and making baseball his primary sport, which was the highest signing bonus of any draftee in history at that time. He became an immediate prospect because of that signing bonus and all the money that the White Sox were willing to commit to him to keep him from playing football. His power was by far his best tool, and he was ranked in the top 25 prospects of all of baseball in the span from 2001 to 2003, peaking at a high of number 12. And he hit at every level of the minor leagues as well, including a .295 batting average with 27 doubles and 27 home runs in Double-A in 2001. But Borchard's success at the lower levels of the minor leagues, even all the way up to Double-A, just would never translate to the big leagues, as he compiled a .205 batting average with a total of 26 home runs over 301 games in parts of 6 seasons, primarily for the White Sox, and followed by short stints with the Seattle Mariners and the Florida Marlins. Those numbers that he put together in the big leagues were good for a 65 OPS plus, well below average for somebody that was supposed to be a power-hitting outfield prospect. Borchard would go on to play in the minor leagues for the Braves and the Giants for a couple more seasons, still trying to make it back to the big leagues. And then he played one season in the Independent Atlantic League in 2011, before retiring at the age of 33. After baseball, he went on to enjoy a very successful life working in the orange industry in Southern California. One thing that I noticed when I started putting these lists together is in a lot of my previous videos, those prospect busts were guys that came up and had good seasons in their first year. Maybe they won Rookie of the Year, but they just didn't really keep it going because of injuries or just ineffectiveness. But throughout the late 80s and 90s, a lot of the best prospects were guys that are actually close to making it to the major leagues. That's not the case going forward, and perhaps why I got really soured about collecting prospects before making the major leagues is a lot of these guys never actually achieved quality major league caliber seasons. They actually sputtered and became ineffective even before reaching the major leagues, or when they did reach the major leagues, they just couldn't cut it. And because the card companies were printing prospect cards earlier and earlier in their careers. Since the 2000s, everybody's shoeboxes in their closets are strewn with prospect players that never even had a good major league season. And another huge prospect that fits that mold exactly was the much hyped Greg Nash. A lot of you guys may not recognize that name because he was well known by the nickname Toe Nash. Toe Nash is a fascinating story, whose hype as a prospect was just a flash in the pan compared to a lot of these other guys that I've talked about in this series. Nash grew up poor in Louisiana, mostly by his father after his mother abandoned their family when Nash was only 12 years old. Greg Nash had a lot of trouble in school, being expelled from 2 different schools and dropping out altogether in the 8th grade before he could be expelled from a 3rd school for fighting once again. But in that summer after he dropped out, he played in a Little League tournament where he struck out 17 of the 21 batters that he faced. And not only that, hit 2 home runs himself. A scout for the Tampa Bay Rays happened to be watching in the stands that day because he had accompanied a friend to the Little League tournament. And being a scout, you always have your eye toward the future. What could these kids do? Obviously, that Rays scout took notice of Greg Nash and jotted down his name to look for in the future. But the problem was, Greg Nash had already dropped out of school, so he didn't attend high school, and he never played high school baseball. So he just fell into obscurity for the next few years. Instead of attending high school, Nash went to work in his cousin's sugarcane fields at the age of 16. He did play baseball in a semi-pro league in the Sugarcane League, where a few years later, that same scout from the Tampa Bay Rays happened to catch one of Nash's games, but this time he was a grown man. At 6 foot 5 inches tall and 220 pounds, Nash had earned the nickname Toe by this time because of his size 18 shoes. The Rays immediately brought Nash into their minor league camp to have a tryout, and being completely unknown to the other 29 major league teams, he went undrafted in the 2000 draft, and the Devil Rays were able to swoop in and sign him as an undrafted free agent for only $30,000. He had a lot of raw talent as both a hitter and a pitcher, and inevitably he got a lot of comparisons to Babe Ruth because of his size and ability to both hit and pitch. A pretty difficult comparison to live up to at the age of 18. The Rays ended up deciding to put him in the outfield, and he played early on in the minor leagues in the same outfield with Carl Crawford and Josh Hamilton, a trio that was supposed to anchor the Rays outfield for the next decade and more. But it wasn't meant to be, at least not for Nash. The hype for Nash was based purely on his raw talent and the backstory of where he had come from. A young kid with immense talent who was a relative unknown to everybody in the game. Something that very rarely happens anymore. And as a result, baseball card collectors ate it up. They were rooting for this guy to become the next Babe Ruth well before he had even played in his first minor league season. His most popular cards were inserted right away into 2001 Bowman and 2001 Topps Traded and Topps Chrome Traded. But the ultimate prize, if you were a Toe Nash collector, was his 2001 Bowman Chrome autograph, numbered to only 500 copies. Nash played the 2001 season in rookie level league, where he played well enough, but he didn't necessarily excel. But the Rays still saw this as a huge win, considering his lack of playing in organized ball. He had very little formal training in baseball and relied only on his abundant size and abilities. So he was seen by the Rays as a very long-term project, but one that could have a huge reward if they could just hone his skills and keep him on the right path. But there were a lot of things holding Nash back than just his inexperience playing professional baseball. He couldn't read, he couldn't write, and his coaches from that time often said that socially he acted like a 13-year-old, the same year that he was abandoned by his mother, and in a lot of ways may not have mentally really grown up from that period. He spent 9 months in jail in 2002. Missing that full season of baseball due to aggravated and statutory rape charges, and the Devil Rays immediately released him upon his release from prison. He was then signed by the Reds prior to the 2003 season, where they hoped he would be able to make a comeback on the field. But the Reds voided his contract after he was arrested again in a bar fight before he even suited up a single time for the Cincinnati minor league system. Nash was arrested again in 2005, and this time spent 10 years in prison, being released again in 2013, but he was reportedly arrested again in 2015 on drug charges. There was a lot of speculation about what exactly went wrong with Nash. Nash was well respected by his teammates and his coaches, and was generally seen as a gentle guy that was hardworking as well. There were some regrets expressed by the Rays organization that he wasn't mentored more closely, especially given his upbringing and sudden exposure to a world that was much bigger than the one he was used to. The odds were definitely stacked against Nash to succeed. It just goes to show you that being a successful baseball prospect isn't always just about the talent. There's a lot more that has to go into becoming a success on a major league field. The next guy I'm going to talk about in 2002 is a guy that had tons of talent and makeup to make it, but he couldn't get past the injuries. And that's Mark Pryor, pitcher for the Chicago Cubs. Pryor was drafted number 2 overall in the 2001 draft and ranked one of the best pitching prospects in the history of the draft coming out of USC. He signed late in 2001 for $10.5 million, a mark that blew all previous numbers out of the water. And because he signed so late, he didn't play in 2001 for the Cubs system. Even though he didn't even play in 2001, he was still ranked the number 2 prospect in all of baseball going into the 2002 season, based on his reputation and his collegiate record alone. And he quickly lost his prospect status in that ranking when he was immediately called up in 2002 to join the Cubs roster after pitching in only 9 minor league games in AA and AAA, going 5-2 with a 2.29 ERA and 79 strikeouts in only 51 innings. He was touted all over the place in the media as having perfect pitching mechanics and being a can't-miss prospect. In his first full year in 2003 with the Cubs major league team, he excelled, going 18-6 with a 2.43 ERA and a 1.79 ERA+. He finished third in the Cy Young Award voting that year. And in the 2003 playoffs, he outpitched Greg Maddux and the Atlanta Braves in the National League Division Series and won Game 2 of the National League Championship Series. He also pitched 7 scoreless innings in Game 6 of the National League Championship Series. But, as you may or may not have heard, the Marlins opened it up in the 8th inning by scoring 8 runs and never looking back on their way to the World Series title in 2003.
Ground ball in the hole is short. And bobbled by Gonzalez, and everybody's safe. They weren't going to turn the double play. They certainly would have gotten the force out at second base.
So everything that Pryor had accomplished up to this point pointed to a Hall of Fame career. And Pryor would pitch effectively again in 2004, his next season. But in 2004, he also went to the disabled list 2 different times. His 2006 season was also cut short to only 9 games pitched, and he missed all of the 2007 season due to multiple surgeries to repair his torn labrum and rotator cuff. After not pitching in 2007, the Cubs allowed him to become a free agent. He tried making comebacks with 6 different teams after that, but he retired after the 2013 season, having never reached the big leagues again. Now, Pryor is a great example of a success in baseball, even though he didn't make it on the field as a big league player. Since his retirement, he joined the front office of the San Diego Padres for several years. He became the Padres minor league pitching coordinator in 2015, and he held that position until he joined the Los Angeles Dodgers as a bullpen coach in 2018, and finally signed on to be the Dodgers major league pitching coach in 2020, a position that he still holds. This was an extremely sad time to be a Cubs fan as well. A few videos ago, I talked about Kerry Wood and how he came on really strong in the 1998 season and had some great years in the late 90s. The Cubs drafted Mark Pryor in 2001, thinking that they would have a huge top of the rotation for several years to come. But neither one of them could get past the injury bugs, and both of them were essentially ineffective and out of the game by the mid-2000s. It's really sad when we see these really great prospects just not be able to play at their level in the major leagues. And Pryor was one of those guys that was so highly ranked and thought to be such a can't-miss prospect that it really started to sour me on the idea of collecting prospects at all. And even though I've got a couple more years of prospects that I'm going to talk about in these videos, around 2002 is the point in my life where I just decided to start backing away from prospecting and waiting for guys to have several established major league seasons before deciding to heavily collect or invest in those players' cards. The last guy that I'm going to talk about this video is a guy that was actually drafted a couple years before, but his prospect status really didn't shine until the early 2000s, and that's Drew Henson with the New York Yankees. Just like Borchard, Henson was a two-way star playing quarterback at the University of Michigan and a huge baseball prospect as well. At quarterback, he ranked second in Michigan high school history in career touchdowns and passing yards, and achieved the record for most touchdown passes in a single season. He was also a 4-time All-State selection in baseball, finishing with the Michigan high school records in home runs, runs, and RBIs, while also pitching to a 14-1 record with a 0.86 ERA his senior year. He was named the High School Player of the Year for the United States by multiple organizations. Now, Henson committed to play quarterback at the University of Michigan for the Wolverines. Then he was drafted in the 3rd round by the New York Yankees as well, although he would have likely been drafted much higher, and he fell to the 3rd round due to signability concerns. And there's a good reason for that. But this was the Yankees, and they gave him $2 million to play baseball with a promise to double that amount if he gave up football. He didn't give it up, playing baseball in the summer and finishing a season early to return to the University of Michigan to play football every September. And this meant less time dedicated to honing his baseball skills. He would battle for the starting quarterback job at the University of Michigan for 2 years with some young whippersnapper named Tom Brady. And Henson would finally emerge as the starting quarterback in 2000 after that guy Brady had moved on. George Steinbrenner tried to convince Henson to give up football again prior to that season, but Henson refused. And in a sudden fit, Steinbrenner traded Henson to the Cincinnati Reds. Henson had an excellent year that year for the Wolverines, and at the end of that season came his biggest decision to date: enter the NFL draft or commit to baseball. And Steinbrenner stepped in once again, promising that he would pry him back away from the Reds if he decided to stick to baseball and give up his football career. As a result, Henson signed a 6-year, $17 million contract to play with the Yankees in 2001 and to be their third baseman of the future. He was ranked as the number 24 prospect in baseball prior to the 2000 season, number 14 in 2001, and number 9 in 2002. The problem, though, was that Henson had seen very limited time on the baseball diamond up to that point. He hadn't played a single game above AA when he signed that $17 million contract. And when he did play, he just wasn't that great. Climbing the prospect rankings had more to do with the potential that he had rather than the actual results. He had a lot of time to make up on the baseball field, and it didn't help when the Yankees assigned him to their AAA team in Columbus, Ohio, home of the Ohio State Buckeyes and bitter rivals of the Michigan Wolverines. As a result of not playing well and playing in Columbus, he was constantly booed, even when he played at his home ballpark. And he had completely stalled by that season in 2003. Henson had signed that contract to be the Yankees' third baseman of the future, but in the 2003 season, the Yankees traded for Aaron Boone. A clear signal that the Yankees no longer thought that Henson had what it took, at least not right now. And they confirmed that when not long after that, they pursued Alex Rodriguez to play the hot corner for them. Now, going back a little bit in time, Henson was selected in the 2002 NFL draft by the Houston Texans. Although Henson played for the Yankees in 2003, even appearing in a couple big league games for the team. Later in 2003, he started working out at quarterback again. He had $12 million left on his contract with the Yankees, but decided to forego it and retired from baseball prior to the 2004 season. He would go on to play for the Dallas Cowboys in the 2004 season, where he battled against a young Tony Romo for the starting job. He played very sparingly for the Cowboys, the Lions, and the Vikings. But once again, he had just been away from the game of football for too long, and he just didn't have what it took anymore to be able to excel in the National Football League. After his second retirement from a major sport, he went on to be a college football commentator, returned briefly to the Major League Baseball to take on a role of the Yankees coaching and then scouting staff, and then recently shifted again back to the NFL to try to find work. Henson's issues seemed to be that he could never really pick one sport over the other. He would give one a shot for a little bit, and when he struggled because he'd been away, he would switch back to the other one, where again he would struggle because he hadn't been playing either one consistently. The Yankees and their fans invested a huge amount in Henson, with essentially nothing to show for it. So there you go. Another 4 prospects from 2001 and 2002. 2 quarterbacks that just didn't make it in Major League Baseball. One guy that was a can't-miss prospect that missed because of injuries, and one guy that was a complete unknown prospect that missed because his team just couldn't support him and he wasn't ready for the big lights of professional baseball. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, share it with anybody you think might be interested. And I'll see you next time when I pick up with the 2003 season and go through a couple more prospects before we finish this series off. Until next time, be careful which prospects you invest in, keep talking baseball, and we'll see you around.